Good afternoon and welcome to another InReach Field Experience webinar. Today we are going to be talking about everything you need to know about SOS. To get started, a little introduction. My name is Chip Noble. I'm a product manager here at Garmin. I am an avid outdoorsman and a very safety conscious planner. I am very excited to have Emily Thompson joining us from the Garmin IERCC, the International Emergency Response and Coordination Center. She is a special projects leader with Garmin and was previously the Director of Partner Relations and Emergency Operations at GEOS. Welcome, Emily. How are you doing today?
Thanks, I'm doing pretty good. How are you?
Good. Yes, great. Thank you. Emily and I have done this SOS presentation a few times over the past couple of years, and it's always a fun presentation. I will talk about our the devices, the InReach devices, and then Emily has lots of very helpful information about the search and rescue and the dispatch side of things that her team does. So we will jump in and a little overview of what we're going to cover. So we will talk about the InReach devices that are used for SOS. Emily is going to share again about the IERCC. We will look at how you trigger an SOS. Emily's going to talk about what happens during an SOS. So I'll share about what you would experience with the device in the field, and then everyone always asks, well, what is happening on the other end of the system? Because there are real people on Emily's team that receive those SOS messages, and they act as the connection between the people who are in the field having the emergency and the local area search and rescue that come to provide assistance. So it's a very critical part of our system, and again, we're very excited to have Emily here to share details about that process. As I mentioned, we will save time at the end for your questions, and we've done this presentation a few times, so we have our top 10 most asked SOS questions. We will cover those ahead of time, and then any additional questions when we get to the end of the presentation. You see here a picture from our 5,000th InReach SOS. And we're going to talk about the Garmin blog at the end, where we actually share details. We will have users contact us and say they had an emergency and experience with their InReach device, and they will share their story, and we provide those through the Saved by Garmin blog. We'll talk about that at the end as well. So let's kick things off, and we like to start these presentations first by talking a little bit at a high level about what are the benefits of using InReach, and in this case in particular using InReach for an SOS. And so the SOS incident management through Garmin's IERCC, through Emily's team, that's a very significant benefit. That means that when you declare an SOS with your InReach device, that message goes up through the satellites and down to Emily's team, where they receive it and they are able to reach out to their extensive database of local area search and rescue organizations and connect them with you as a user. They respond to you and share details about the process and things like estimated times of arrival, that sort of thing. So that's a major benefit, having that Garmin IERCC. It takes advantage of the Iridium satellite network, and the Iridium satellite network is special because it has coverage, 100% coverage through that satellite network. One of the other significant benefits of the Iridium network is that it is a two-way network. Not only can you send a message, declare an SOS, send a casual message, track your location, but you also get message delivery confirmation and the ability for the IERCC to reply. So that two-way capability means you can declare the SOS. They can ask, is it a medical emergency? Is it an equipment failure? What is happening? And you can respond if you're able to. You don't have to, but if you can respond and provide additional detail. One of the things that we talk a lot about, it's all about providing as much information as possible to that local search and rescue group who is coming to provide assistance. It helps them make sure they have the right equipment, any special equipment based on your circumstances. The InReach device also offers tracking, excuse me, that allows you to Your location is sent up to the Iridium satellite and then down to the search and rescue team. That happens once a minute for the first 10 minutes, and then every 10 minutes an updated location is sent. And that means that if the situation is such that you have to move, maybe there's it's just reasons, fire or different things that cause you to move, or you're in a boat that's drifting, then your tracking location will be shared. And that also helps guarantee that local area search and rescue is able to find you. We also have the ability to cancel an SOS. We don't always think of this, but when your emergency is over, it's important to communicate that to local area search and rescue so that they know that either the situation has changed or you've received assistance and they no longer have to send resources out to your location.
But I do want to add to that, to Chip's point, is that yes, you can cancel the SOS, but if you're able to, say if you no longer need assistance, if you could send us a message beforehand, just kind of letting us know, like, never mind, I'm good to go. I don't need assistance anymore, before canceling it. That way we can tell the responding agency. Because if you just cancel without anything, they may still go. So.
That's right. That's a great point, Emily, to communicating with the IERCC. And then they can work through to local area search and rescue. Thank you for sharing that. The note at the bottom, this is to remind everyone, we know this, but as people with InReach devices, they do use or require an active satellite subscription. So that's one important piece. You always want to test your gear and make sure that your subscription is active. The other detail is that there are some locations in the world, some areas that have special regulations that prohibit the use of satellite communication. It's all of our responsibilities when we go on a big adventure, a bucket list trip. Check, particularly if you're traveling internationally, check with the local area jurisdiction, make sure you're aware of any applicable laws around the use of satellite communication devices. So with that, let's see. Emily, would you like to, this is a slide about the IERCC. Would you like to share more here?
Yeah, of course. So the Garmin IERCC, so the International Emergency Response Coordination Center, it's a 24-hour operation center where we monitor the SOS for all of the Garmin InReach devices. And so since we do it all over the world, it means we also have to cover different languages. So we actually support over 200 different languages and dialects, and we have coordinated rescues in we've coordinated more than 16,000 emergency responses in over 200 countries and territories. So a lot of people one of their main questions are about the language barrier. So you don't have to worry about that. We use an interpreter service or even messaging you. If you don't speak English, we're able to translate those messages and send them in your language as well.
Very good. Let's look at the process for triggering an SOS. And as we get into the details for this, we want to start with making sure that everything is set up correctly. This is an important first step. So really this section about before you leave on your trip, we're going to be talking about configuration of your account. I believe everybody with an InReach device has some experience and familiarity with the Explore website. This is where we go to manage our subscriptions and our emergency contacts and emergency notes. We'll look at those details here. The first piece, when you log into the Explore website, you can go to the plans and devices section of the website, and we want to go here to confirm that we have an active satellite subscription. And you can see that here in the middle there, that subscription, this particular device is activated into a Freedom Extreme plan. And that's, it's just important to make sure that your device is active. And that covers things like live track and messaging and your SOS. From there, you want to review your emergency contacts. So you go over to the accounts section of the website and you can see not only your personal contact information, but also your primary and secondary emergency contacts are there. And we would encourage you so that Emily's team gets the most up-to-date information when they look at your account. If there's been any change, or perhaps someone is actually traveling with you, so you want to replace them as an emergency contact, just make sure that you have the updated names and how the Garmin IERCC would reach out to them. That is a useful feature because we all know that when we are planning an adventure, you plan the hike and then you share that plan with someone so that they know if something happens. And Emily's team contacts, for myself, if they contacted, say, my wife or a family member that I had specified, they could provide additional detail. Oh, Chip was going to climb Mount Washington and it was from this time to this time. And so that adds some additional detail for them. And so make sure that those are up to date. We also have a field, the emergency notes field. And this is important because you can type additional information that you want Emily's team to be able to see when, should an emergency come up. This might be anything from details about your trip or details about any medical conditions you might have, any health conditions, that sort of thing. So you can tie all of that into updating your account before you go out on your adventure. From there, we're going to talk about the process of triggering an SOS and how that looks on the device. And so we're going to show you the Explorer Plus, the Mini, the GPS Map 66i, and the Mini 2. These devices, while it's not all of our InReach product lineup, it does represent the major types of devices. So the GPS Map 66i has a very similar interface to, say, the Montana 700 series or the Alpha 200 series for people using the track and train devices. But this is the workflow for how to do that. And the first step is to trigger an SOS is to press and hold the SOS button. And actually, I have my, let me just show you, I have my InReach device here, my GPS Map 66i. So press and hold the SOS button. That is behind the SOS door. You just open the door and you push and hold. And after a few seconds, you see the countdown timer starts. I'm going to cancel mine just so we don't actually declare an SOS here in the building. But that's the process. And so we tell people to press and hold the SOS and wait for that SOS countdown. It isn't that you need to press and hold for 3 seconds or press and hold for 5 seconds. Press and hold the trigger to let you know to release the button is when that countdown timer appears. Then you know. And from there, there's really no other action that you have to take. That SOS message will go out after those 20 seconds. You do, as I just did, you have the ability to cancel it if you change your mind in that time frame. But press and hold, and then that message will go to the Garmin IERCC, and you can exchange messages. You could reply to their message. You could add additional details about the conditions, the things you're experiencing. The note here is just to remind everyone, if something happens, if it's a medical emergency and you're just not able to interact with the device, Emily's team certainly still initiates a rescue. So that's an important thing to reassure everyone.
We're gonna try to get some information, but we don't wait for you to respond before we dispatch emergency services. So.
Yes, that's a great point. And I know in your slides you show a little more about the timing. Your team is actually doing a bunch of things all at the same time when someone has an emergency. So keep that in mind. If you can share more details, great. But Emily's team is in motion from the time the SOS is triggered. And Emily talked about, and I mentioned that you can cancel the SOS from the device, but Emily's point, make sure that you send that message that says, things are under control, here are the reasons why we're canceling, that kind of thing. Emily, that's an important detail, and I forgot, we talked about it in the last webinar and I forgot to mention it. But that's the key. So your team understands why this SOS all of a sudden stopped.
Yes. So definitely don't cancel until until assistance gets there, or if you're going to cancel, let us know ahead of time so that we can relay that to emergency services. Because there have been many instances where people just cancel and we let the agency know and they aren't sure whether or not they meant to cancel it, so they'll still go ahead and send assistance out, or they may not. It just depends on the agency and what they want to do. So.
That's a very good point. And I think sometimes, that's the key, is just to communicate. If the device was in an SOS state, explain why it's all of a sudden not in an SOS state. So very good detail. Oh, and yes, this last bullet is just saying, at the end of the presentation, we have the detailed slides for many of our devices as well as the apps on how to trigger the SOS and how to cancel it. So if you have a particular device that doesn't show in this list, we will show it at the end to give more examples. So we talked just a second ago about how to trigger from the physical device. You can also trigger from your app on your phone. There are two different apps where there's the Earthmate app and the Explore app. The main difference between the two is the devices that are supported by those apps. The Earthmate app is our original companion app for our InReach devices that works with the DeLorme devices as well as the early Garmin devices after Garmin acquired DeLorme. That covers the InReach Mini, the Explorer Plus, and the the SE Plus. And just looking at that workflow, that means that from the menu in the Earthmate app, you select SOS, and then it is two physical button press action. You tap on the SOS and you slide it to the side. That's to prevent any accidental SOS declares. Once you slide it to the side, you have the ability to send a text message when you're initiating. The countdown timer, much like you see on the device, happens in case you choose to change your mind. You're welcome. And then a confirmation message is sent to the device, letting you know that your SOS was successfully initiated. And then you'd be texting back and forth with Emily's team. From there, also at the end, if you've resolved everything and communicated that with Emily's team, then you can cancel the SOS. This is an important note that we show for our apps. The app is doing everything through the InReach device. So make sure that you have your InReach device connected. It has to be paired and connected to the Earthmate app in order for those SOS messages to go out. And you have to have an active InReach subscription for all of this. So from there, the other app that we have, this is a newer app that was created with Garmin for the GPS Map 66 series. It also works with the Montana, the Alpha, and the new Tread devices, the Mini 2, which we just released. But very similar in its functionality. The Earthmate app and the Explorer app, they're companion apps for your Garmin device, depending on which device you own. And they have the mapping, they have the navigation, they have the messaging, the tracking, and the safety. And so very similar SOS workflows for the Explorer app as compared to the Earthmate app. You need to get to the devices page and explore because it supports many different types of Garmin devices. An InReach device in the Explorer app has these features, the weather, the tracking, and the SOS. You tap on the SOS button and that shows you a similar SOS declare step where you can tap on the slider, drag over and start the countdown timer. That countdown timer will also go for 20 seconds. And then at the end of the countdown, you will send a message. A default message goes to the IERCC. Emily's team, the person who receives that message, will respond to you and begin your back and forth interaction, hopefully with the IERCC, who then relays to local area search and rescue. And the note about canceling if you no longer need assistance, and the note about needing to have the Explorer app connected to the InReach. The InReach is the device doing the over-the-satellite messaging. The app is just a user interface that connects to the device. So we may have the question at the end, but I will tell you now, you don't have to have cell phone service for your app to work. You do not have to, you can be in airplane mode and the system will still work. There are many other devices that can be used to trigger an SOS. So the Mini 2, the Mini, the 60 series Montana, those are what I would refer to as InReach devices, where the InReach technology is built into the device. We also have devices like my Fenix watch that I'm wearing that has ANT Plus technology. That's a wireless technology that allows my Fenix to connect to my GPS Map 66i and I can then use my watch as the remote control for my InReach device. That includes features like SOS. So I can start and stop tracking, I can read a message, I can trigger an SOS with my Phoenix watch. There's quite a lineup of InReach compatible Garmin products, the wearables for fitness, for backcountry use, the cycling computers like the Edge cycle computer. In the marine industry side of things, there's a chart plotter you see in the middle of the screen here. The Overlander and the Zumo, those are devices for our off-road vehicles, side-by-sides, ATVs, that sort of thing. But the very exciting thing is using that Ant Plus technology. You can actually enable all of these devices in the wide range of activities to have the InReach capability to declare an SOS and send messages. So that's very exciting. And you can see a full list of all of the compatible InReach devices on the Garmin website and our support site. We talk a lot about that. Our support team does a wonderful job of documenting and providing white papers and examples of how to use the system. So from there, let's talk about what happens during an SOS. And Emily, I'm going to turn things over to you to present all that the IERCC does.
Yeah, of course. So what happens is when you press that SOS button, like Chip just instructed, what's going to happen is your SOS with your alert and your profile information and your coordinates are all going to get sent to the IERCC. And that way they have access to those emergency contacts that you set up and those emergency notes, as well as your specific information. So what happens is when the IRCC gets this, they're going to plot that location that came from your device to determine the appropriate, local emergency services. And they're also going to send you a message requesting the nature of your emergency. And like I mentioned before, we're not going to wait for a response from you. We're going to go ahead and start notifying local emergency services. So we'll go ahead and contact them, provide all the information, including that latitude and longitude. If you are able to send any messages to us, of course, we're going to relay all of those messages to the responding agency. And there are many instances where they want us to send you messages asking more questions about the situation, especially if there's like a medical situation going on. The agency is going to want to know more information. So we'll provide all that. And there are also many instances where they want to speak directly with the device user. So there may be times where you'll get a message from Search and Rescue asking, say, so-and-so, this is local Search and Rescue, and then ask, specific questions. So just be aware of that. It may not always just be the IERCC messaging you. So maybe the agency.
Good. I think that last piece is pretty exciting. The fact that we can now connect the person in the field directly to the person that response team, the local area search and rescue. That's pretty powerful. So definitely the more interaction that people can have with the IERCC and local search and rescue, the better. So that's exciting. Let me jump to the next slide for you, Emily. Hold on, I lost it. There we go.
So on top of contacting emergency services, the IERCC is also going to reach out to your emergency contacts. Again, that's why it is very important to keep those contacts updated, because the more information that we're able to get about what the device user is out doing, who they're with, any medical conditions, what their itinerary is like, anything that we can get from those contacts is going to be beneficial to be able to pass to that responding agency. And then throughout the response, the IERCC is going to continue to communicate with those emergency contacts with any updates that we get from the agency, as well as we'll communicate with the device user and provide them updates as well, even if you're not able to respond. So again, don't worry about it if you're not able to respond. The IERCC is still going to send you messages to let you know what's going on, who's coming. If there's a possible ETA, we'll let you know all of that information. So like I said, we'll continue to communicate with you throughout the whole incident until we do receive confirmation that you no longer need assistance.
Very good. Great. Well, thank you for taking us through that, Emily. I know, like we said in the beginning, there's just a lot of questions. People see how to use their device, but they don't always have a good picture of what's happening behind the scenes. And there is a lot going on after the person presses that SOS button. Things involved with your team reaching out to the user who has had the emergency, to local area search and rescue, to emergency contacts is very, it's quite a process. So thank you for that run through. So from here, let me just, sorry, I'm moving things around. I'd like to talk about some best practices for how to use the system if you have that emergency, some of it around positioning of the device, that sort of thing. So this first bullet here is talking about, because the InReach Mini, for example, here in this picture, that it has the antenna at the top of the device. So we always tell people to keep your InReach device elevated with a clear view of the sky, and you want to make sure that that antenna is pointed up towards the sky. That gives it the best chance to transmit messages during an SOS. We also want to remind people that once you are in an emergency, and we've already talked about this a bunch, but make sure that you communicate with the IERCC using that two-way texting capability if you're able to. And as Emily pointed out, if something happens and you can't respond, they still proceed with all of the steps to have local area search and rescue come to your assistance. This next one is really a good point for anyone, whether you're using an InReach device or not. But if you have an emergency, if you need assistance, it's good to stay in the location where the SOS was triggered, particularly with a satellite communication device that has your latitude, longitude coordinates. Those are sent to the search and rescue team, and that's where they are going to be traveling to try and get to you. If something happens, we also talked about this, if something happens and you need to move, there is tracking on the device. It is enabled when you declare your SOS, and an updated location will go to the IERCC once every 10 minutes after the first 10 minutes. And that will help them track, say, if your boat is drifting or if conditions have changed and are dangerous and you have to move to a new location. So that's another important piece. And that's just general best practices about how to carry the device, how to make sure that it is has the best chance of transmitting your location and any messages, and trying to stay put if possible. So I'd like to talk through what we have as our top 10 frequently asked SOS questions, and share this before we get to the questions that folks are putting into the chat right now. So the first question, when can I trigger an SOS? And this is a really, we start with this because it's a popular question. We get this one a lot. And the answer here is that there's really no one size fits all circumstance for SOS. We talk to people about whether or not they feel confident in their ability to handle the situation on their own. And we say, as soon as the situation hits a point where you're unsure of the outcome, that is the right time to reach out to Emily's team. And Emily, jump in. You've shared in the past a good anecdote about it being better to reach out to you early than to wait. Can you share more about that?
Yeah, so that's where that two-way communication really does come in handy, because if you're concerned that you may end up having an emergency, you can activate the SOS and communicate with us. Even if you have any questions about your location, we can go ahead and contact emergency services and kind of let them know your current situation and that you may be worried that it could escalate. So we would much rather you activate that SOS earlier rather than later, because we can always start with the response, we always stop the response, but sometimes it's harder to get it started, if that makes sense. So yeah, don't be scared to get it and communicate with us.
That's right. That's right. And Emily, you had mentioned, if you wait, the weather conditions could actually get worse. The medical situation might be minor when you first realize there's a situation, but if you wait, that could also escalate. So I think that's an important detail, that the ability to communicate has really helped. We don't, you can be proactive. Emily can start the process, and help can be notified. And this next part, I think, is also important. When you communicate and you have that two-way capability to share with Emily, and then Emily's team shares with local area search and rescue. It may not be that they need to dispatch a helicopter to your location, but they can evaluate the information that's coming in, and it could actually, maybe they only have to send some volunteer hikers up to assist you getting down off the mountain. That ability to share additional details is pretty important. And then the last bullet here, so you can chat with the or message with the IERCC about details. You can also reach out to other contacts on with your system, and sometimes that helps if you wanted to provide reassurance to friends and family who you know might be receiving that message because they're your emergency contact. You might be able to provide additional details to explain to them what's happening. So when can you trigger an SOS? Well, really watch to see when you feel like you no longer are sure of the outcome of the situation. Whoops, and I apologize, we got a couple more here. So the other bullet here is about recreating responsibly. We talk about this because when Emily's team reaches out to local area search and rescue, they will be going into the same conditions that you are in. So when the weather rolls in, sometimes we have to be responsible and abandon our summit attempt and note that we can safely come down from this and not add to our risk level and come back another time for our attempt. But that kind of piece to recreate responsibly and think about the people that might have to come in and provide assistance if we get into a situation. And then the note that we've had on all of our slides that you need to have an active satellite subscription to trigger an SOS. This next question comes up a bit. Who can I trigger an SOS for? Emily, would you like to talk a little about this? I know your team assists people with lots of different types of SOS emergencies.
Yeah, so that is a big question that we do get often is who can I only activate for myself, or can I activate the SOS for a friend? And the answer is yes, you can activate for yourself, you can activate for a member of your party, you can even activate for somebody you come across or somebody that you just met, maybe while hiking or something, or you come across an accident that you need to report because nobody else has cell signal or something. Yes, of course you can activate that device for anybody. And if you do have that, or if you're able to communicate those details with us, of course do that, because like I said, we're going to be updating your emergency contacts and stuff. So if you did activate for somebody else, it may be helpful to let them know too, so that we can tell them like, hey, it's not for them. They did activate, but they activated for somebody else that they came across. So
good, that's a good point. And I remember one of the calls you were talking about, sometimes you can even activate if it's not a person. It might be that you see smoke or a fire in the distance, and that's something to certainly communicate with local fire and rescue. They may be able to go and address forest fire kind of situations. And so it's not always about people either. Sometimes it's about the conditions, the environment that you're experiencing. So it's a good question. If someone's borrowing your device, they can certainly use the device to trigger an SOS. I think, Emily, you were alluding that then you definitely want to communicate with with the IERCC to provide those details. Maybe definitely let them know that the device owner, it's a different person using the device, and you can update those details. I have allowed friends to borrow a device in the past, and I put a little note in to explain that in case something happens. And then so to build off of that, if it's important because it is a safety device, it is a piece of electronics. It's very discoverable. We've shown you, there's the button. It's pretty straightforward, but make sure that the other people in your group know that you have an emergency notification device with you, and make sure that they understand, well, if you open the door and you push the button, so that they know how to trigger an SOS, because it might be that you as the device owner are the person that needs assistance. So you want to show them how to do it, make sure that they know how to interact with the device should an emergency come up, and they know how to use the emergency notification device. Yes. What information does the Garmin IERCC see during an SOS? Emily, can you share what is it that your experience as the dispatcher on your end? What did they see?
Yeah, so when you press that SOS, we're going to get all of that profile information that you entered online before whenever you're setting up your device. So we're going to see your information, we're going to see your phone numbers, your address, both of your emergency contacts that you have listed, those emergency notes that you entered previously, as well as the the location of the device. And like Chip mentioned before, while the device is in SOS mode, we are continuing to get that updated position every 10 minutes while stationary. That way we can provide, if you do start moving, we can provide those updated coordinates to emergency services. So you don't have to worry about that. A lot of people have that question as well, like, well, what happens if I move? Do you know that? Are you going to be able to see that? Yes, we will be able to see your location and everything until you cancel that SOS.
Very good. And then note at the bottom, if the device runs out of battery, I know that sometimes you will actually, if someone says their device is running low on batteries, I think you sometimes counseled for them to cancel the SOS, turn the device off, and then you give them like a time. Can you share a little bit about that? I know sometimes people wonder, what happens if my battery is low, and how do we manage that?
So, if you are having to stay overnight and you realize your battery may be getting low, we may instruct you to go ahead and turn it off for the night and power it back on in the morning, and then we'll continue, resume communication. But also keep in mind, like, just because your device dies and say you're not able to communicate that with us or something, if it dies while in SOS mode, it doesn't cancel the SOS. It actually just stops transmitting updated positions. It doesn't just stop emergency services from going out. We'll let them know, like, hey, we're not getting updated positions anymore. Actually, if it does die while in SOS mode, whenever you plug it into the charger and it powers back on, it will actually go back into SOS mode. So then you'll have to cancel it out. So.
Very good. Let's see from here. The next question that we get quite often is, can I message during an SOS? I've already actually said that in the previous slide. You can message with the IARCC and your other contacts. The messaging to friends and family to provide reassurance to them about what's happening, that does not impact your SOS status. The SOS conversation, whether you're using the Earthmate app or the Explorer app, that's a very specific SOS conversation thread that is separate from your other casual messages. Same on the device, there's an SOS page that you go to. And I think we've also said that the IARCC may put you in contact to directly message back and forth with local area search and rescue. So definitely can message during an SOS. Who responds to a rescue and how long does it take? Emily, would you like to share a little about this?
Yeah, so these are two very big questions that we get all the time is, first of all, who responds to a rescue? And so this question, there really isn't a designated answer. It's going to depend on where you're at. Search and rescue is different all over the world. So if you're in the United States, we may contact, the county sheriff's department or National Park Dispatch, just depending on where you're at. If you're in a national park in Canada, we may coordinate with the RCMP or National Park. And then the rest of the world, we coordinate with what's called a Rescue Coordination Center, which is just a designated point of contact within the country. And then they'll coordinate with local search and rescue. So there really isn't a specific answer to that, just we would have to know the actual place where you're going. But and then the other question that we get is, how long does it take to get rescued? And there is no answer that we can provide for that, because that's going to depend on a number of things, including the resources that are available, the time of day, the remoteness of the location, the weather, the extent of the injuries. So if we know that it's a severe medical situation or something, if you're able to communicate that, we can let the agency know, and it may speed things along. So yeah, there's no specific time that it could take. It could take 30 minutes. It could take 16 hours. It just depends.
Yeah, and I think that's something that I've learned working with you, Emily. Sometimes we have in our heads that the Garmin IARCC is actually administrating the rescue. You are dispatching and communicating between the user in the field and local area search and rescue, but it's their call, their responsibility to schedule, to determine the course of action and all of those pieces, and you communicate back and forth between the two groups. But there's a lot of factors that will go into how long the rescue takes, and some, you can imagine, I know for myself on many of the adventures I go on, it's a long time just to get into the beginning of the hike or that sort of thing. And so they have that same challenge to deal with. And so a lot of factors that can impact how long it takes. Another question that we get a lot is around the cost of a rescue. And this is a good question and a tough one. And what we say is it actually, it varies. It varies even in the United States, state by state, county by county. And there are laws and regulations for all different locations where the rescue is going to be conducted. And much as we said in the beginning, it's important to check with the local authorities in the area as you're planning your trip. You want to find out if there are any rules around the use of local area rescue services and that sort of thing. And the reason we say that is because factors, we talked about responsibility when you're traveling and the areas where you're going and those kind of pieces. So just the best answer is if you're concerned about the potential for an SOS and the cost that might be incurred, definitely check with the area where you're going to be traveling and see if there's any additional details they can provide. The note here at the bottom, any fees that are associated with and triggering an SOS, those are charged to the individual for whom the SOS was triggered. So certainly there's protection in place for Good Samaritans who come across someone on the trail who needs assistance. Don't feel that you should avoid declaring the SOS because you're concerned about being charged for someone else's medical emergency or whatever the emergency might be. Definitely we want to aid and assist. What does SOS coverage include? Emily, can you share with us? I know there's a bunch of different options with the IERCC, and this is a good one for you to cover for us.
Yeah, so what the SOS coverage includes is the response coordination handled by the IERCC. So basically when you press that SOS, it comes to the IERCC and we're going to handle that coordination of the rescue. And then all the communication with us, including like the location that's pinging every time when you're in SOS mode, the messages between us, everything, that's all going to be included as well. A lot of people are concerned, what's going to happen if I press that SOS button? Are you going to charge me? Are you going to bill me? Am I going to get trouble? And no, you're not. It is included, so you don't have to worry about that.
Good. Is there anything that is not covered?
Yes. So if, like Chip mentioned before in the previous slide, if any expenses are incurred for that rescue, so say if they send out, a helicopter or ambulances, whatever it may be, that agency is going to bill you directly, and so that those costs are not covered by that, with the SOS coverage. So you may be applicable for, or you may have to cover those fees.
Okay. I think the next question is a good segue from the previous one, and could you please share with us about what are SAR plans, search and rescue plans, and how are they used?
Yeah, so you can purchase an additional search and rescue plan prior to your trip, and this just covers those expenses that we just talked about. It could cover up to $100,000 in those rescue resources. Like I said, though, you just have to make sure you purchase it beforehand before you go out on your trip or activate that SOS.
Very good.
And a good thing to notate, that plan that you purchased beforehand, it is specifically for you. If you have others that you want covered as well, you can go online or go to actually IERCC.com or speak with our customer support to add on any extra, additional benefits that you may want for your family, children, friends that are with you, anyone. So.
Very good. Oh, and there's one extra note there at the bottom.
Yeah, this is a big one. Like you can purchase that plan directly from your account, or you can go to IERCC.com and go from there.
Very good. One of the things people ask a lot is, how do I test my InReach device to make sure that it's working? Each of our InReach devices has a test page, and this is really to make sure that your subscription is active and it works in a pretty straightforward process. You go outside, so you have a clear view of the sky, and what you're testing is, can my device see the Iridium satellites, and can it send the test message, and can the server then respond with a confirmation. And so you'll see this workflow on each of the devices. Just make sure you find the test page. You can send up to 5 test messages per month. And I highly recommend, if someone has, say, suspended their device in the off season, when you get ready to go back out on your adventures, put the device through a test. You get a very satisfying green checkbox when it's done, and it lets you know that everything is ready. You don't want to wait until you're at the trailhead to realize that you've suspended your device and forgot to activate it. There's a lot of sending the test message gives you that peace of mind, because it tests all of the system, and you know that it's ready for you to use it in the field. So you can prevent, I guess where I was headed, you can prevent a lot of unfortunate situations where you're not able to track your location or communicate because you forgot to test the device before you got out. So definitely do that before you head off into the backcountry. And Emily, this is one particularly for you. We get a lot of questions. Can I trigger a test SOS? So the previous slide was about how to just test the system in general to make sure that it had a satellite, active satellite subscription. But there's an additional test that, could you talk through how people can test the device with your team?
Yeah, so a lot of people kind of just want to see what it's like, see how it works, if it works, so you can do this. But I just ask that you schedule it in advance. Don't just press the button just because you want to press the button. We do ask that you schedule the test with us in advance, and when you can do so by going to iercc.com, and there's a tab on the top that just says test a device. You submit a request with all of your device information, your name, the date and time that you would like to test. And once you submit that, the IERCC will reach out to you to approve that test, and then you should be good to go. It's as simple as that.
Very good. Yeah, I think that's a really a nice service that you provide to allow someone to schedule a test, see how the device performs, and really get a good understanding of it.
For sure.
The next batch of slides, these are the slides that I mentioned in the beginning. They're in the slide deck. Go to the handout section and download them. I'm not going to walk through each individual one. An example for the InReach Mini 2, this shows how you open the door the same way I showed you with my GPS map. You open the SOS door, you push the button, and you'll start a countdown timer. This is how to trigger it with the Mini 2, and this is how to cancel it once you're finished and you've communicated with Emily's team that you no longer need assistance, or that assistance has arrived. Cancel the SOS. We have that for the Mini 2, for the original Mini, for the InReach Explorer Plus. Find your device, look at the slides, make sure you feel like you've had a good exposure to how that works. GPS map series, then how to do the same thing in the EarthMate app. We walked through this, but these are the detailed slides on how that process works, and then how to cancel. Same for the Explorer app. These are some of my favorites. It shows how my Fenix watch has the InReach remote widget that we talked about earlier, and I can initiate an SOS from my wrist. So I have my device clipped to my pack. It's in my pack, in the pocket on the top. It's behind me. I see something that I want to trigger an SOS for, get help for someone, something like that. I can do that right from my watch. That's the workflow for the Fenix. How to cancel. Same for the Instinct. That's another very popular Garmin wearable in declaring canceling. For people who are involved in cycling activities, this is how it looks on an Edge cycle computer, declaring, canceling. So download the slides, take a look at each of your devices. We always like to talk about some additional resources. The Garmin Explorer website, that's where you manage your plan and your account. The Garmin support site, a great location to get additional documentation, the manuals and our product support videos. It is also where we publish these webinars, so you can go back and see other topics that we've talked about. And my favorite section is the Garmin blog. That is where you can read. We saw a bunch of pictures from past SOS reports, but you can go to Saved by Garmin. That is a link on the Garmin blog, and you can read about users who have shared their stories with us. And there's some very powerful SOS stories there for you to look at.